I'd like to thank all of our panelists for focusing, because they had a lot to say and relatively little time to say it in, and they squeezed as much out of the time they had available as they could, and I'm sure we all appreciate that. We do have a little bit of time for some questions, so if anybody wants to ask anything, feel free.
I have a question for Secretary Reed. You mentioned that a new bill was being proposed for voted ballots to be sent back per email. Is that for just military voters, or is that for military and civilian voters?
It is for both military and civilian voters. We actually have more civilian voters than we have military. And it, again, is something we've heard back from them, because many of those civilians are in places where they're just really inadequate postal service.
I would like you to notice that I'm going to ask my question of Linda Lamone and not my boss, Sam Reed. Linda, if election officials had their preference as to whether they received a mail ballot from the voter or whether they received an email ballot or a fax from the voter, which one would they pick? Which one do they prefer to get?
Well, I think we would prefer to get the mailed paper stock back, but because that's such a difficult thing to accomplish it with so many different situations, that most of us in this room that deal with elections, our main goal in life is to make sure we enfranchise as many people as possible. So however we can get that ballot back is how we want to get it back.
I have a question about domestic absentee voters, if that's acceptable in this forum. We put together an early voting calendar for journalists and other people to look at. And this year, 2010, there was a substantial number of states that reported to us that the mailing date for the domestic absentee ballots was moved to 45 days before the election. I wonder how they picked that date. And that was a substantial increase. So I'm wondering why it's the same date as this overseas, right? So, or earlier. And so I'm wondering why the domestic date, when it's much easier to get the ballots domestically to a non-UOCAVA voter, is the same. And I'll ask the question of Sam, I know, because Oregon and Washington managed to get their ballots out 14 days. I assume it's an administrative convenience, but anyway, that's what we've been finding.
We are, as I said, almost entirely a vote-by-mail state. Funny way to put it, but we have just like 2% of the voters vote at the polls. And we required the counties to mail the domestic ones out 20 days, within that 20 days, 18, 20 days before. And so we have a very different standard for the UOCAVA voters.
And I think it's important to remember that it's uniform voters, and so I don't know the exact numbers, but with all the bases in the United States compared to the bases overseas, I'm sure there's more military voters living in the United States at any point in time. And so these are really domestic voters who are in the military or their families. And so I think we need to kind of expand our language in a way. And what I appreciate were the states who use the electronic transmission for their so-called domestic absentee voters. It's a tremendous amount of work. I really... I can't overstate the heart-stopping aspect of that, but that's really a great gift to all of our voters, and I hope we can find a way, especially working with vendors, to make it less burdensome to then use that tool as you've done.
They loved it.
Yeah, they loved it, and it's a big job, but we got to figure out the technology to make that less of a big job, so everyone can have that opportunity.
Thanks. For those of you who either send ballots out by email or receive them back by email, I'm wondering how spam filters affect you. Do voters complain that the ballots get thrown in the spam? Do you get ballots back and your system throws it in spam folders? Does the amount of spam you get unrelated to that overwhelm you? So how does that affect you in terms of email?
I just report on sitting out. Spam filters are one thing, but also anybody who has heavy security, particularly people who work in the Pentagon, people who work in intelligence agencies. There's a whole nother set of problems that do arise, and we've had to really kind of stay on top of, if you didn't get this, is this address one that's going to allow that? We just have to kind of keep at it. We don't accept, them back. But in terms of going out, we first were alerted to this by somebody in the Pentagon, and then we realized we had to address it, not so much as strictly a spam issue, but as a barrier issue that has security implications.
Hi, thank you so much. I live in California where we implemented a permanent vote by mail, and I've noticed that since we moved to that system, we also have a huge number of ballots that go out every election that don't come back. And I think it's because voters are not proactively asking for a vote by mail ballot at each election, and we have a very mobile society. And I was interested in Ann's statistics from Texas that was showing also seems like a pretty big disconnect rate. I just wonder if you think that's going to change in the future as the registration renewal requirements are modified, and whether any states are looking at using email communication and other ways to keep the address information fresh for the ballots that you are mailing out.
Since we've had vote by mail in the state of Washington for a number of years, I can maybe speak from more experience, is that is the case for the first few cycles, but actually what it does is it really cleans up your list. Because when you get them back, addressee unknown or whatever, you can start working, the counties then work to, all right, where are they? And so it ends up that we're getting fewer and fewer coming back that way, and that it is, in fact, a good system for cleaning your rolls. Now, it also helps having the statewide voter registration database and having access to all kinds of other databases, including our Department of Licensing and such, so that we are able to get more current addresses. But in other words, we found it kind of the opposite. And we started with the permanent absentees like you did too, and it kind of worked our way into having more entirely vote by mail. And as I understand, that's the experience in Oregon as well.